From San Quentin to ADX, the most violent prisons in North America revealed. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. The air inside San Quentin's infamous adjustment center was thick with tension. Guards raced toward the clamor. Shots had been fired. When they forced open the heavy doors, they found chaos. Blood smeared on concrete, men lying wounded or dead. A single pistol sparkled on the floor under the harsh fluorescence. Among the injured was George Jackson, the radical inmate leader. In the shadows, other inmates lurked, shaped by fear, rage, and the relentless pressure of prison politics. It was August 21st, 1971, the day the San Quentin 6 riot exploded and all hell broke loose. As guards tried to restore order, rumors swirled. How did a gun even get in? Whose plan was this, an escape attempt or a diversion? No clear answers emerged. In the chaos, 6 men would face murder charges, years of trial, and a legacy forever linked to that outbreak of bloodshed. But the violence didn't end there. Half a continent away, another prison was being designed, one built not just to contain killers, but to break them. In 1995, the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, known by the chilling name ADX Florence, opened in Colorado. Its purpose: to house the most dangerous and uncontrollable inmates, the worst of the worst. Decades later, despite its impenetrable walls, ADX would see its own horror. On April 21, 2005, 2 inmates, Mexican mafia members Silvestre M. Rivera and Richard Santiago, cornered their rival, Manuel Torres, alone in a restricted walking yard. With no guard in sight, the pair mercilessly beat and stomped Torres to death. Video surveillance later confirmed every brutal step. Even in the cleanest version of hell, human violence found a way. And that was only the beginning. Reports would later emerge of prisoners in solitary confinement wailing, screaming, banging their heads against concrete. Some mutilated themselves with shards of glass, razors, or parts of radios. Others swallowed razor blades or glass. Dozens committed suicide over the years, 9 confirmed deaths in just 3 decades. Thousands of miles apart, 2 prisons stood as monuments to violence, one old and overcrowded, the other ultramodern and isolating. But what thread connected them? What made San Quentin and ADX Florence the most violent prisons in North America? As the guards sealed the riot doors behind them in San Quentin, and as Rivera and Santiago walked calmly back to their cells in Florence, a terrifying revelation loomed. Even in the darkest prisons, violence is never fully contained. Years before the gunshot rang out in San Quentin's adjustment center, before riot alarms echoed through the prison yard, the story began with a slow build. A mix of politics, tension, and men hardened by the world long before they ever saw a prison cell. San Quentin State Prison, sitting on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, was one of America's oldest and most overcrowded prisons. By the late 1960s, violence inside its walls was already a daily threat. Racial tensions ran high. Guards were overwhelmed. Inmates formed factions shaped by race, ideology, or pure survival instinct. The prison felt like a boiling pot, and the lid was beginning to shake. At the center of this growing storm was George Jackson, an inmate whose story began long before that fateful day in 1971. Jackson had been sentenced to 1 year to life for a $70 gas station robbery, but his time behind bars transformed him. He became politically outspoken, writing books, challenging the prison administration, and building influence among younger inmates. To prison officials, he was a threat. To some inmates, he was a leader. To others, he was a symbol of rebellion they didn't want to be associated with. Even outside the prison, activists rallied around him, calling his situation proof of a broken justice system. But inside San Quentin, pressure built with every passing month. Officers increased restrictions. Jackson pushed back harder. Small conflicts escalated. Every hallway conversation seemed to carry a double meaning. Every rumor gained explosive potential. Across the border to the north, Canada was facing its own reckoning with prison violence. In the 1970s, Kingston Penitentiary, Canada's most famous maximum security prison, was spiraling into chaos. In 1971, the same year as Jackson's death, Kingston experienced a violent four-day riot. Inmates took guards hostage, fires consumed parts of the prison, and the nation watched in disbelief. When the dust settled, the public learned that overcrowding, neglect, and lack of rehabilitation had helped fuel the explosion. Two countries. Two prison systems cracking under pressure. Two sets of institutions struggling with the same core problem: human beings pushed to their limits. This backdrop of chaos shaped the decisions that would soon give birth to something new, a kind of prison the world had never seen before. By the late 1980s, the United States was tightening its grip on crime. A wave of gang violence, drug-related cases, and high-profile federal convictions pushed the government to rethink how to contain the most dangerous offenders. The old model, scattering high-risk inmates across different prisons, was failing. Too many attacks, too many escapes, too much brutality. The solution, federal officials decided, was not to reform a prison but to build a fortress. And so plans began for a place later nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. A prison built in the mountains of Colorado, isolated from towns, roads, and most of society. A place where inmates would spend 22 to 23 hours a day locked inside concrete cells designed to silence communication and eliminate violence. On paper, ADX Florence would become the safest high-security facility in American history. But prison officials had no illusions. Violence wasn't something you could simply design out of a building. It traveled with the men who carried it, shaped by years of trauma, loyalty, betrayal, or survival instinct. Back in San Quentin, the tension that had simmered for years finally erupted. In the weeks leading up to the 1971 incident, guards noticed changes: whispered meetings, unease in the tiers, small gestures exchanged between inmates that felt unusual. Some officers suspected a plan forming. Others thought it was just another rumor. San Quentin had enough rumors to fill a book. And then one day, everything snapped. But long before the first shot rang out, before the inmate movement became national headlines, before ADX became the final destination for the country's most dangerous men, the seeds of violence had already been planted. A dangerous question hovered over every warden, every guard, every investigator who studied America's toughest prisons. If men were transformed by prison pressure, what happened when pressure met desperation? And what happened when desperation finally broke? The answer, the moment that would tie San Quentin and ADX together in an unbroken chain of prison violence, was coming. And when it arrived, no one in North America's correctional system would ever forget it. The day after the San Quentin riot, investigators moved slowly through the charred, blood-stained corridors, searching for answers. The prison smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Every step echoed with the weight of what had happened. Reporters waited outside the gates. Families crowded phone lines. Politicians demanded explanations. Inside the prison, detectives began piecing the story back together. Who brought the gun inside? How had so many officers been overpowered? Why did the violence explode with such force on that particular day? As investigators questioned inmates and guards, one thing became clear: this wasn't a random outburst. It was the result of years of tension, mistrust, humiliation, and anger. Forensic teams traced the smuggled gun to a visitor believed to have hidden it in a wig, a detail that would spark national debates about prison security. Autopsies revealed the scale of the attack. Officers described being ambushed, stabbed, and held hostage. What unfolded on August 21, 1971, would eventually lead to one of the longest and most expensive trials in California history, the San Quentin 6 trial. The trial lasted 16 months, became a media storm, and ended with mixed verdicts that satisfied no one completely. But the true impact of the riot was far wider than the courtroom. The incident pushed California to overhaul parts of its prison operations, tighten access rules, and revise how high-risk inmates were housed. Yet even as San Quentin struggled to rebuild, federal officials watching from Washington drew their own conclusion. If a prison as old and fortified as San Quentin could fall into chaos, America needed something stronger, much stronger. That conclusion guided the final design of ADX Florence, the supermax that would define a new era of extreme containment. Every corner of ADX was built to prevent exactly what had happened at San Quentin: no blind spots, no easy weapon access, no group movement. Inmates were sealed behind steel and concrete so thick that even shouting from one cell to another was nearly impossible. But no matter how sophisticated the design, human violence still found a way. Only 10 years after the prison opened, the 2005 killing of Manuel Torres shook the system. Torres, a known rival of the Mexican mafia, had been placed in a small outdoor recreation pen, a place designed for solitary exercise. Somehow, two high-ranking gang members, Rivera and Santiago, managed to enter the same space. Cameras captured the entire attack. The guards, unable to reach the area quickly due to security layers, watched in horror as the beating unfolded in real time. The murder triggered investigations, security reviews, and intense public scrutiny. ADX officials insisted the system worked as intended. Inmates were charged, prosecuted, and convicted. But critics argued the incident proved an uncomfortable truth. Even the most secure prison in North America could not eliminate violence. It could only cage it. Over the next years, more stories emerged from ADX. Lawsuits claimed inmates were left in extreme isolation that damaged their minds. Advocacy groups warned that the silence inside the concrete cells didn't reflect safety, only suffering. Several prisoners took their own lives. Others filed complaints about declining mental health, hallucinations, and the crushing pressure of 23-hour confinement. Still, the prison remained the final destination for America's most dangerous offenders. Escapes were impossible. Attacks were rare, but not unheard of. And every time a crack appeared, the memory of San Quentin echoed in the background, reminding officials what could happen when control slipped. In 2016, a Justice Department report quietly acknowledged what correctional experts had warned for years. Supermax prisons might reduce large-scale violence, but they fueled different dangers: psychological breakdowns, self-harm, desperation. Even in the most fortified buildings, the human mind could implode. By the 2020s, documentaries and investigative reports were calling ADX the cleanest version of hell, while San Quentin began transforming into a model of rehabilitation, education, and reform. Two prisons that once symbolized violence were drifting in opposite directions. But one truth connected them across history: extreme environments create extreme outcomes. And when human beings are pushed to the edge, whether in a crowded 1970s cell block or a silent supermax isolation unit, violence becomes a language, a warning, and sometimes a breaking point. The story of North America's most violent prisons is not just about riots, murders, or lockdowns. It's about a system struggling to understand what punishment should look like and what happens when the system itself becomes part of the danger. As investigators sealed their final reports, as the trial transcripts were boxed and stored, and as ADX continued locking its thick metal doors each night, one chilling lesson remained. Inside the toughest prisons on the continent, the walls may hold the bodies, but they can never fully contain the violence within the human mind.